Up next in the broadcast, the father of a victim of the April ferry disaster ends a near 7-week-long hunger strike, not because of any progress on an investigation, but he says because he has to live to fight on. Korea logs its 29th straight monthly current account surplus on increasing exports, but imports also reported at a faster rise from higher oil prices. And Japan confirms that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe did indeed issue a note which praised some of its worst wartime criminals as martyrs, further threatening ties with neighboring countries. Primetime News begins now. Welcome to Primetime News, live from Seoul. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Chery. Thanks for joining us tonight. The father of a ferry disaster victim who's been on a hunger strike demanding more say in a bill that would investigate the April ferry disaster ended his fast today.
And so did a key opposition lawmaker, but that doesn't mean the parliamentary deadlock is over. Our Myung-kil reports.
A prominent relative of the victims of the ferry disaster ended his 46-day hunger strike, raising hopes of a breakthrough in a political deadlock that has paralyzed parliamentary proceedings in Korea for months. The fasting by Kim Young-ho, the father of one of 233 students killed in the April ferry sinking, has been the focal point of protests by victims' families demanding an independent investigation into the circumstances behind the disaster.
Although I decided to end the hunger strike, I will continue to protest until the special law is passed at the National Assembly. My goal is to build a country that is safe to live in. When I get better, I will go back to the Gwanghwamun Square.
The families want a committee in charge of the probe to be given investigative powers, but rival parties have been unable to come to terms on an agreement that satisfies all sides. The bereaved families say the end of Kim's hunger strike is not indicative of any progress being made in negotiations, and that their protests will continue. But the end of Kim's fasting is raising hopes that differences will be bridged. The ruling Saenuri Party is most optimistic. Ruling party leaders held a second round of talks with representatives of the victims' families on Wednesday and reported progress. Another meeting is scheduled for next Monday. The talks are taking place with a newfound sense of urgency. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy has boycotted all parliamentary activities in protest at the ruling party's refusal to give bereaved family members a greater say in negotiations over a bill that would probe the causes of the ferry accident. The ruling and opposition parties have reached agreement on the legislation on 2 previous occasions, but both drafts were rejected by the Sewol-ho ferry families. Myung-kil, Arirang News.
The Japanese government has confirmed that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe recently sent a note hailing some of Japan's worst war criminals as martyrs and the foundation of the country. The news may further strain ties with its neighbors, including Korea. Kwon-soo tells us more.
It comes as no great surprise anymore when Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe chooses to glorify some of Japan's worst war criminals, much to the despair and anger of Japan's neighbors who suffered under Japanese imperialism. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga has confirmed that Abe sent a note to a memorial ceremony in late April. In his message, Abe offers his sincere condolences to the criminals whom he refers to as martyrs that became the foundation of the country's peace and prosperity. It was the first time a sitting prime minister sent such a note, but Suga said Abe's remarks did not come from his capacity as prime minister.
In this case, he sent this message as Shinzo Abe and the head of the Liberal Democratic Party. As such, the government thinks of him in this respect as a private citizen.
Korea's foreign ministry told Arirang News that it's deeply concerned by Prime Minister Abe's act, calling it another denial of the post-war structure set by the international community to address Japan's past atrocities. On the same day, China demanded that the Japanese government make a clean break with militarism for the sake of rebuilding relations with its neighbors. The ceremony's venue was founded in 1994 to worship nearly 1,200 soldiers convicted of some of the worst wartime crimes. 14 Class A war criminals are among those who are also honored at the more well-known Yasukuni War Shrine in Tokyo. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Korea logged a current account surplus for the 29th straight month in July. So does this mean a rebound in domestic consumption? Our Hwang Ji-ae has more.
Korea has posted a current account surplus every month for nearly 2.5 years now. The central bank says the nation logged a surplus of $7.91 billion last month. That's almost identical to the $7.92 billion surplus recorded in June and to the $7.9 billion surplus in the same month last year. Exports of products rose 1% from a year earlier to almost $54 billion on strong shipments of automobiles and steel products, while imports increased 3.5% to $47 billion. The Bank of Korea says, however, that the rise in imports does not necessarily indicate a pickup in domestic demand as it comes on the back of strong oil prices. Experts also warn on too much optimism.
The import volume still remains sluggish, but the rise in energy prices pulled up the total amount of imports. So the current account surplus is still largely coming from the slumping domestic demand.
The current account surplus during the January to July period now stands at over $47 billion, up 20% from the same period a year ago. The bank expects the Korean economy to easily reach its $84 billion current account surplus projection for all of this year, but adds that this month's surplus is likely to fall short of July's due to fewer working days. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
In today's in-depth segment, we're talking about Abenomics and, of course, naturally in turn, Choi Kyung-hwan-nomics here in Korea. And to help us with this conversation, Professor Yang Jung-seok is joining us right here in the studio. Professor, thanks for coming in today.
Happy to be here.
It's been a while. And we saw Japan's second quarter GDP dropping, struggling a bit, down 1.7% on quarter, down close to 7% on year. I mean, yes, we did have that consumption tax hike, but the pace of that drop was quite unexpected. What do you think went wrong?
Okay, well, I think this was somewhat expected, though not this large drop. But a lot of economists were expecting that a lot of people purchased their goods earlier to avoid the increased consumption tax. So you had an extra rise at the last quarter, and then that fall this quarter. So if you look at their growth so far this year, it's running around 0% actually. So I'm not sure if you could call it a big drop. It does show, though, that the power of Abenomics is becoming weaker.
So speaking of Abenomics, the first pillar was the fiscal stimulus. The second pillar was government spending or front-loading it. The third is reforms. And reforms and doing, changing some of the regulatory structure hasn't gone as well in Japan. How big an effect is that going to have?
Okay, well, the first pillar, which is actually increases monetary supply, money supply, trying to cause inflation, that's actually worked fairly well. Japan has fairly high inflation now. It's just a question of whether people believe this will last, because unless people believe that inflation is going to increase, they will not start spending their money because they expect the prices to fall in the future. And so that expectation has not set in. And well, there's two reasons why the lack of structural reform is worrying. One is that the fiscal policy and monetary policy can only have short-term effects. If you want to continue the growth, then you really need to increase your supply efficiency. And without structural reform, that's not going to get done. Politically, because that third pillar is not being done, people are losing confidence that this Abenomics policy will continue. So whether the inflation will continue, whether the same type of policy will continue, continue, that confidence is being undermined. And I think that's part of the reason why Abenomics' strength is sort of weakening.
Well, let's turn this back here to Korea, where we're seeing some challenges to some of the regulatory reforms and some of the new economic programs we've been wanting to put into place because of the deadlock at the National Assembly. What effects in Japan can we really can serve as warnings to us here in Korea?
Okay, well, luckily Korea is not as in a bad position as Japan. Japan has been stuck in this low growth for 20, 25 years, whereas Korea, we've been stuck in maybe only about 5 years. So we still have room to maneuver. But I think the more political paralysis there is, the lack of, and the Park administration has been actually been fairly good about this. They've tried to show a consistent method to their economic policy. That is to say, very expansionary. Whereas in Japan, they seem to always hedge their bets. Right now, at least from the ruling party, we're not seeing the same type of mistake that we see in Japanese ruling party. But the paralysis in the National Assembly, if it gets much worse, it can cause some uncertainty about the future, and that may undermine the Park administration's plans.
No, that's for sure. I mean, it's been going on for a while. Thank you very much, Professor Young, for your insights today.
Thank you.
Curry's comments came in response to
your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Chery from the heart of Seoul.
Begins now.
Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
Kia Motors is looking to expand its presence in the North American market by building a huge plant in South America. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
Korea's second largest automaker, Kia Motors Corporation, plans to build its first factory in Pesqueria, Mexico, just 200 kilometers south of the U.S. state of Texas. The company will invest more than $1 billion in the plant, which covers 500,000 square meters of land. The assembly plant is expected to start producing 300,000 Forte compact cars and Rio subcompacts in a year.
So this additional 300,000 will help us to be one of the leading automotive manufacturers in the global market.
Mexico has been a great attraction for the automotive industry. Local demand for cars is around 1 million units a year, and labor is cheap and highly productive. The country also boasts great access to markets in the U.S. and Canada, as Mexico is a member of the North American Free Trade Agreement. Due to this, auto giants including General Motors, Volkswagen, Toyota, and Nissan have already built assembly lines in the country. Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto says Kia's expansion in the region will help boost investment in the country.
Kia's commitment is to induce more investment from auto part companies of $1.5 billion.
Korean automakers have to pay duties of up to 20% when directly exporting to Mexico due to lack of a free trade agreement between the two countries. But now with a plant in Mexico, Kia expects to raise the proportion of its global production from 44% to rival that of other automotive giants, which hover around 75%. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And now on to a slightly nostalgic item, I would say. If you grew up in Korea in the 80s or 90s or even younger, you're bound to have grown up with banana-flavored milk. The beverage is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, and our Connie Lee tells us the secret behind its long-running popularity.
It was in 1974. When banana-flavored milk first appeared in stores around Korea in its unique jug-shaped bottle. It came out at a time when the Korean government was urging its citizens to drink more milk. To encourage people, food and beverage manufacturer Bingure had the bright idea to flavor the milk with banana, a fruit once considered a luxury.
Bananas were expensive during that time and not easily available. People appreciated just getting a taste of this fruit through this drink.
The drink was a big hit then, and it's still a big hit now, enjoyed by people of all ages.
I like it because it's sweet. My friends like it too, and drinking it makes us happy.
Over 800,000 bottles are produced each day as the company's factories strive to meet the demand. In Korea alone, about 250 million bottles of banana milk are sold each year. That means in Korea, an average person drinks about 5 a year. Sales also back up the drink's increasing popularity. From 92 billion won, or about $90 million in 2005, sales surpassed $148 million in 2013.
Overall, we believe the drink's unchanging nature makes it a success. The taste and look of the drink hasn't changed much over the past 40 years. And in the next 40 years, we want to be a recognized global brand like Coca-Cola.
The drink is already being recognized in China. Exports were a mere 500 million won in 2009, but they reached 15 billion won, or about $14.8 million last year. Officials credit the popularity of the Korean wave and the increased number of Chinese tourists to Korea for the explosive growth of banana-flavored milk. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Korea's leading orchestra, the Seoul Philharmonic, has wrapped up its European tour with a performance at a 120-year-old festival known for its summer concerts. Our Park Ji-won reports from London.
The BBC Proms is one of the world's greatest classical music festivals, founded back in 1895. Since then, the annual event has showcased the most prestigious orchestras and musicians. This is where the Proms concerts are held every evening from the month of July through September, all broadcast live on BBC Radio 3. And the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra makes its debut here at the Proms this summer as the first Korean orchestra to take part in its 120-year history. Maestro Jung Myung-hoon, who's led the orchestra since 2005, nurturing it to become one of Asia's best while at the helm, says he's excited to meet the audience members at the Proms.
It is a great honor to be asked to participate in this festival, and it is a recognition of the quality of the orchestra. But I think as performers, once we start a concert, all those things don't matter. It's just that public.
The Seoul Philharmonic performs 3 repertoires: Debussy's La Mer, Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 6, and a contemporary piece written by prominent Korean composer Eun Suk-jin titled Su Concerto for Shan and Orchestra.
This piece is very abstract, but they have so amazing, so thousand colors between the chord harmony, between breathing. Each breathing is so organic.
With its London performance, the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra wraps up its 2014 European tour, spanning 4 music festivals, including the Grafenegg in Austria and the Merano in Italy. Park Ji-won, Arirang News, London.
Ukraine has accused Russia of launching a direct military invasion across its border as heavy fighting erupts in the eastern part of the country.
With more, we turn to Paul Yi at the News Center. Paul, it's only been a day since the leaders of both nations held face-to-face talks, but it appears the crisis in eastern Ukraine has escalated to new heights.
Right. That meeting between Presidents Poroshenko and Putin in Belarus had raised hopes of a long-term ceasefire. However, as you said, the situation seems farther than ever from that goal. Kiev's government forces are now reportedly fighting on multiple fronts against separatist fighters. This as over 1,000 Russian troops, according to NATO, have entered Ukrainian territory in support of the rebels. Our Yu Lian reports.
The House of Culture in the eastern Ukraine rebel stronghold of Donetsk consumed in fire. While some fled, some stayed to examine the damage. Locals there say the fire killed one and left a few others wounded. This comes as Ukraine accused Russia of new military incursions on Wednesday, the latest development in 5 months of fighting between Ukrainian government forces and pro-separatist rebels. Russia has constantly denied accusations it is supplying weapons and sending soldiers to help the rebel forces. No reaction yet from Moscow on the alleged incursion. This latest escalation comes only a day after hours of talks between the two countries' presidents seem to mark a turning point in a 5-month-old crisis. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko and Russian President Vladimir Putin, along with EU representatives, met on Tuesday in Minsk.
Yesterday's talks in Minsk were very effective. I clearly stressed that there will be no bargaining over sovereignty, territorial integrity, the independence of our country, the sovereign choice of the Ukrainian people.
Following the talks, Putin also said Moscow will contribute to create a situation of trust, but hopes the war that killed over 2,200 had hit a turning point are quickly fading from Wednesday's attack. Also, less than 24 hours since the Minsk meeting, Ukraine warned Europe that Russia plans to halt gas transit to Europe by the end of the year. Russia denied the claim, saying it is making maximum efforts to fulfill its contracts with Europe. Yurian, Arirang News.
And moving on to the Middle East, the United Nations has condemned Islamic State militants and the Syrian government for committing war crimes in their fight against each other. The UN report released on Wednesday details human rights abuses committed in Syria as observed during a special inquiry between January and July this year. It said public executions were not rare in northern territories held by the Islamic State, as well as torture and recruitment of child soldiers as young as 10 years old. On the other side, the government of Bashar al-Assad was also accused of war crimes, including using chemical agents against civilian targets. And shifting to the latest corruption scandal to hit Europe, IMF chief Christine Lagarde is being investigated for her role in a controversial payout worth 400 million euros to business tycoon Bernard Tapie. The French magistrate said Lagarde was suspected of simple negligence in the government fraud case from 2008. Lagarde, who was France's finance minister at the time, has called the suspicion baseless. Political analysts say the investigation could jeopardize her chances of being considered as a possible candidate for France's 2007 presidential election. And finally, the instant messaging service Snapchat has reportedly been valued at nearly $10 billion US. According to the Wall Street Journal, the boost came after Snapchat signed a deal with venture capital firm Kleiner Perkins, which agreed to invest up to $20 million into the 3-year-old startup. The social media app, known for its short-lived messages, is estimated to have grown to more than 100 million users worldwide. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to sports. Kicking off with football, Germany's Bayer Leverkusen advanced to the Champions League after trouncing FC Copenhagen in the second playoff leg. South Korean stars Son Heung-min put them on track after scoring the opener in the second minute for his second Champions League goal and third in all competitions so far this season. Teammate Stefan Kiesling finished with a double to put it away. Elsewhere, Arsenal, FC Porto, Zenit and Athletic Bilbao are some of the notable teams that also advanced. And that brings us to the Champions League draw, where the field of 32 teams will be divided into 8 groups. Drawing from 4 pots, 4 teams will form 8 groups, with the restriction that teams from the same association can't be from the same group, or rather can't be in the same group. Now, the draw takes place live in Monaco at 5:45 p.m. Central European Time. That's 12:45 a.m. here in Korea. And shifting gears to U.S. Open tennis, 2-time champion Venus Williams turned back the hands of time, reaching the 3rd round for the first time in 4 years. Williams cruised past Tamia Baczynski in straight sets to move on, but faces a tougher task next round in 13th seed Sara Errani of Italy. Williams, at 34 years old, is the oldest player left in the draw, but the former world #1 has shown that she can still rally with the best of them. And finally, let's come home for Thursday's KBO action. It's the Nexen Heroes taking on the Hanwha Eagles. Now it gets started early on with 2 on and 1 out. It's Park Byung-ho. He singles and 2 runs scored. Now Hanwha answers back on a Kim Tae-gyun single in the bottom of the frame. But we go on to the next inning. Seo Gun-chang's 2-run single puts Nexen in a good position, a 4-1 lead. And 4th inning, Park Hun-do, he slams one for Nexen, and they blow up in the 8th inning for 4 runs and go on to win this one 10-4 over Hanwha. And looking at the other games, Samsung is actually falls to Dusan 6-5, and Dusan wins that one. SK beats LG 4-2. Meanwhile, Lotte leads Kia in the 9th inning, and this one should wrap up real soon. And that wraps it up for now. This has been Stephen Che. Your weather update is up next.
Happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather updates. It's been a clear day here in Seoul, but rain continued for the 5th straight day in the southern part of the country due to a low-pressure trough from China. Be aware as more showers are forecast tomorrow with up to 60 millimeters falling in Jeju. This accompanied by strong winds and thunder, while Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province are looking at around 30, and most areas down south will get no more than 20. An umbrella is a must tomorrow, but on the bright side, we'll finally catch a break with the weekend shaping up to be nice and sunny, perfect for outdoor activities. As for Friday's readings, Seoul will mix it to 29, while cities down south hover around 26. On to other places. Jeju peaks at 24, Dokdo and Myung-kil hit the mid-20s. That does it for me for now, but I'll see you again after midnight. Have a wonderful rest of the evening.
And that's primetime news for this Thursday. Thanks for watching. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Chery. We'll see you soon. Have a great night.